If you've been podcasting for a while now and you're struggling to turn your downloads into profit, then this episode is for you. The influence that you have with your podcast could be a powerful asset that will turn your podcast into a profitable and sustainable business that has an impact. And Shayna Rattler Davis joins me on this episode. She hosts The Influence Economy, and she shares the strategies and the mindset shifts that you need to take your podcast to the next level and start achieving your goals. And in this episode, we cover how to transform your podcast from hobby to media empire, the 3 Ps that every episode you make should have one of, how to meet your listener at their level and make them feel heard, how to rebrand your podcast while retaining your listeners, and so much more. If you want to turn your podcast into a valuable asset, then this episode is for you. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. So your podcast is The Influence Economy, and I just wanted to give the listener some context. Could you explain what the influencer economy is, please?
Absolutely. So my definition of the influence economy is where visibility intersects with intention. And when you do that, it creates tangible results. And when I say tangible results, I mean like life-changing income, shaping industries, leaving a legacy. And the reason why that's so important is because, Joe, what I recognized over the years is that there are so many people that have visibility, but they don't have profitability. They're seen, but they're not necessarily paid well. And I believe that influence is really a currency, but it's only if we treat it like an asset. And so we have to realize that people who have influence, whether you have an audience of 1 or you have an audience of 1,000,001, that you have an opportunity to actually use your influence in a way that not only amplifies your work, but also can leave a lasting impact as well. And so I came up with the idea of the influence economy and named my podcast, that renamed actually, because I've been
And so where does podcasting come into this? I guess a lot of people have a podcast and they have influence, but like you say, they might not be making money out of it, or they might not know how to turn that into money. So would you say a podcast is one of the best ways of building that influence first? Would you say there are any kind of difficulties specifically with podcasting and turning that into money?
I would say that podcasting is the modern day vehicle that gives you access to massive exposure and unlimited income. It's my guiding belief that if you are already impacting people with your message, your skills, or your expertise, that you should have a podcast. But a podcast without a business model is just a hobby. And unfortunately, the way that the podcast gurus and the way that the podcast conferences are teaching you to monetize your podcast is usually very limited to, sell some merchandise, have some affiliate links, stick some ads on there that might generate you $250 a show. And if you're real sophisticated, offer a course. However, in many ways, that's stepping over dollars to get to dimes. I believe that you should look at building an ecosystem of products, services, and partnerships around your podcast, like corporate sponsors, like corporate contracts, like paid speaking engagements, because that's really what's going to elevate your income. So you have to see your podcast as a gateway to opportunity. If you only see your podcast as another way to generate content or another way to only build your email list, most people are not going to keep doing it because they're not making enough money to do more than just cover the expenses. What I think we should do is that we should recognize that our podcast can actually, if we do it correctly, can be used as a magnet.
Yeah, and I think even for the people
and
listening who their podcast is maybe more of a hobby, normally there's some level of influence that they want to build, because otherwise they'd just be talking, they wouldn't be recording it and putting it online. And then
you'd be surprised. I've met people. I spoke at Podfest. It's a conference in the United States that brings out about 3,500 podcasters and content creators. And the number of people that I met that said, I do it just to have fun and I don't care if anybody listens or only 5 people a year listen, was astonishing. I don't know. In my opinion, Joe, I feel like there's so many other ways that you can accomplish those things that don't require the time, resources, and effort as a podcast, but to each his own of what vehicle they want to choose to do it. But I definitely don't want to spend the amount of time, effort, and resources that it takes to do an actual podcast. And we're talking about a podcast with an actual RSS feed that is being sent out to podcast directories. We're not talking about people that go live on Instagram and say they have a podcast. We're not talking about people that only post a video to YouTube only and say that's a podcast, because that's a completely different way of looking at getting information out there than what an actual
and then a lot of those
official podcast
podcasters
is. I think that's worth the
likely
distinction.
wouldn't be doing it for indefinitely. It might be something that they'll try for a year and realize the sheer amount of effort it takes to keep it consistent, and then sort of they've done it and that's that. But I mean, most of the people listening will, they'll at least want to grow it for some reason, whether that's to replace their income or even if it's just as a kind of side hustle or something like that. So where would a podcaster start then?
That's exactly what I think.
I think a lot of podcasters, they might think that they had every intention of making some money through it at the beginning, but then it just feels like it's really difficult to break in or know which avenue to go down. So where would you recommend starting?
Absolutely. So the very first thing that we have to do is we have to view our area of expertise beyond our current industry. And this goes a little bit against the grain of what we've always been taught about selecting a niche. You have to choose to brand yourself in a way that I call a transcendent brand that makes yourself attractive beyond a small niche of people that you can serve, and also makes you attractive to the mass market. I'll use myself as an example, and then I'll give another example that might be more common. So when you look at myself, although I have grown my podcast to the top 3% in the world, and podcasting is central to the strategy that I teach, I don't brand myself as a podcast expert. I brand myself as an influence expert. Why? Because if you look at influence as kind of like an umbrella, helping podcasters learn how to make serious money is just one way that I serve that arena. But by broadening the scope of what I do to look at it from the standpoint of influence, a corporation could bring me in to work with their leaders on how they translate their influence into income. A major news outlet or television show could bring me in to talk about, hey, it's Women's History Month. How do women learn how to own their influence? A traditional book publisher would go, oh, that's something that I would pay you to write a book about because it's going to be relevant to so many people. And so what I want your listeners to do is I want you to think about your area of expertise in broader themes instead of just a small sliver. I'll give you another example. Perhaps you are a health coach and you teach moms how to lose weight. Well, what if your transcendent brand or your umbrella was women's total well-being? One is specific, one is scalable. And so when you look at your show, instead of me just having a show about podcasting and how you can use your podcast to make serious money, I do talk about that on the show. But I talk about the show from the standpoint of how do you use your influence in general to make serious money and leave lasting impact. So for the people that are listening, I want you to think about, what is it that I say my show is about? And is that a broad enough way of looking at my area of expertise or the problem that I solve or who it is that I serve in a way that would make me attractive across the mass market? Because when you can do that, that's when you can use your show to get a $25,000 contract instead of a $250 sponsorship. That's when you can use your show to say, hey, these are the other things that I have going on that you could sponsor. These are the things that I talk about that you could potentially get a 6-figure book deal and not just have to self-publish and still find yourself in the marketing rat race where you're only selling 500 books.
What result you're getting people rather than just the medium.
Correct. Who do you serve in a broader way? What is the broader problem that you solve? So if I just look at podcasting, I'm not just helping podcasters to be able to make serious money. What I'm doing is I'm helping individuals learn how to own their influence and use their influence as a mechanism for greater income and greater impact. That's a broader problem than just solving the problem that a podcaster would have of not being able to make serious income. So that's where it all starts. And it's just that perception shift of that, and that your podcast, you have to think about it beyond the microphone. What is the gateway of opportunity that your podcast can lead into instead of just
Yeah.
being another content
It reminds me
mechanism?
of, I
But
was
that's where it
talking
all
to a
starts.
client
It's the
recently about her
foundation.
podcast, and it's all around helping women sort of in their midlife who want to spend more time focusing on themselves. Maybe they've spent the last 10, 20 years doing everything through the lens of what their partner, what their husband needs, what their kids need, and now it's all about them. So we were thinking about naming the podcast, and we were thinking about names that purvey like what result that person's going to be getting. So lighter life, rather than just like around coaching or something specific about what they're doing. It's more about the result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's more scalable. It opens up so much more
Mm.
opportunity because one is
Yes.
specific,
It's the
one is
same thing
scalable.
for me, even though what we're doing is podcast production and helping launch podcasts and things. It's really about the amplified part of the podcast name, amplifying a message, because as things change, even though I believe podcasting is here for a long time,
Exactly.
things do change with AI and everything. Like, who knows what's going to happen in 10 years, but it's, even if podcasting looks completely different, it's still about amplifying people's message.
Exactly. And that's so much more mass market appeal, because if you wanted to land corporate contracts, companies would bring you in and pay you very handsomely to teach their leaders how to amplify their message, especially in the departments where they're speaking on behalf of the company. If there was a local news station that was, had a particular theme that week, or a particular, something that they were focusing on, they may not necessarily bring you in to talk about podcasting because they're talking to the entire city. They don't know how many people in the city actually have a podcast or have a desire to have a podcast, but the number of people that might be listening, that it would be applicable to what it is that they're doing on ways that they could amplify their message, is so much more appealing to the broad audience. And so that is the exact way that we have to look at this, is how it's all about positioning. It's not necessarily changing what it is that you're doing as much as it is of how you're positioning what it is that you're doing to make yourself attractive
Yeah, and I'm sure that
beyond
gives
just a
people
small
a good
segment of the
idea, and hopefully
marketplace.
gets people thinking about how they're positioning themselves. If we get a little bit more practical, let's say somebody listening, they're getting a few hundred downloads per
Yes,
episode, so they've starting to get a kind of steady following, and they want to start making a bit of money from it. And where would you suggest somebody starting if they're just not sure? If it's like, should I make a course first? Should I reach out to some sponsors? Because we're talking about that whole kind of ecosystem here, but I guess there's always going to be a first step.
yes, yes. My answer is always going to be yes, you can get paid for the show itself, but the real money is going to be, what does the show open the door for you to get paid beyond that? So, what I would ask you is, if you're getting traction in your show, where are you sending listeners? Are you sending listeners to something that is going to lead to something that they could potentially pay you? Are you sending them to your email list where you can nurture them and sell them something in the future? Are you using it to say, I'm going to work with 5 clients this month, and if you're interested in that, here's where I am on Instagram, DM me, so that we can see whether or not that would be a good fit? Are you using your show to say, who are the type of people that I really want to work with? Let me invite guests on that's the audience that they serve, because when they share the episode, those people might want to work with me. Are you using your show to say that if I do, now that I've listened to Shayna Davis, want to have some contracts? Are you using your show to invite decision makers from a corporation on, so that you can talk about what it is that they're doing in their organization and what's working and where they need help? Because we all, when we turn off this microphone, we all talk for a good 5 to 10 minutes after the recording is over. That's a lot of the ways When I look, Joe, I've been teaching how to land corporate contracts and how to land corporate sponsors for over 10 years. I've done it myself and I've taught other people how to do it. But for the 5 years that I've been podcasting, all those things have gotten so much easier because now instead of me trying to reach out to someone on LinkedIn or hope I run into them at a conference that we can have a conversation later, I just invite the decision maker onto my show. And then when the microphone ends, oftentimes that's when I'm like, let's have a conversation about how I can help you do in your organization what it is that we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes. So that's where it starts is if your show is doing well, how are you using your show for greater opportunities? Now, again, I'm not going to say that now also is not the time to find out how you get people to
Yeah, that's
sponsor your
fair.
show. That's just not the
Yeah,
type of stuff that I
that
teach.
makes sense. Like it's what we call like the prospecting podcast, where you can invite these decision makers on, and even before you've even got a single listen, before your podcast even launched, you've just gotten on a call with somebody who would have said no to a sales opportunity, maybe, but if you're like, come on and talk about yourself for 45 minutes, then it's going to be a yes.
Everyone loves to talk about themselves. And it doesn't matter. I had a conversation with someone yesterday. It doesn't matter how crafty you think you are when you send someone a LinkedIn request to get a meeting. You're like, oh, let's just have virtual coffee and talk about, they know they know where that's leading, but they're not going to sniff it out, like, hey, I want to have you on my show because everyone loves to talk about what? Themselves. Everyone loves to highlight what it is that they're doing. The only way that they're going to say an absolute no to being on your show is if it's just obvious that what you say your show is about is just not in alignment with who they are and what it is that they're doing, or they just flat out don't have the time to do it when you have the time to do
I think it's
it.
about
Outside of that,
you
most
got
of
to
the time
think
they're
about
going to
like
say yes.
what opportunities are out there. Who would you want to speak with, but also who would be valuable to your ideal listener? Because sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect there. You may be speaking to someone you want to speak with, but is this actually valuable for the listener? And you talked about on a recent episode, whenever you're putting an episode together, it should either position you, profit you, or pave the way for a power play. Could you just explain what those three things would look like in the form of an episode and why podcasters should be thinking that way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we've talked about all three of them so far. We just didn't talk about it in that way. Position you. Are you positioning yourself as an expert in an area that is going to help people solve the problem that they recognize they have? And that's the key. Oftentimes, even in the examples that you gave about, the person that you were talking about in their podcast, the way that we talk about, let me back up and say it this way. The problem that we say we solve is not the problem that other people recognize that they have. And the way that we talk about solving that problem, we're not using language that the person that has the problem uses. So we're now not properly positioned to actually be able to help that person. So if you take somebody again, I'll go back to the health coach that helps someone lose weight. What is keeping them up at night? They're not laying there saying things like, if I could just thrive. But that's what people say they do. Oh, I help you thrive and all this other stuff. That's not language that people use. I'm going to help you reclaim your so-and-so. Nobody talks like that. But what they do say to themselves is, am I ever going to feel confident going shopping with my friends? If they're single, am I ever going to be attractive to the opposite sex? Those are the things that are keeping them up at night. So are you using language that actually positions you in a way that people go, oh, I recognize that that's the problem that I have because you've positioned it in a way that is using language that I use and not your cute, clever marketing language that is sexy, but is not clear and it doesn't mean anything to anyone. That's the positioning piece.
Yeah.
The profiting piece, we've talked about that ad nauseum already. Are you using your show to get you paid? There's a lot of ways to do that, but is it really a profitable way? And then is it paving the way for a power play? Is examples like what we just talked about. Are you using this to get you on a big stage? Are you using this to get a 6-figure contract. I talked to 2 people within the last month that have used their influence and have used their show to land. One girl I talked to yesterday, she just landed a $200,000 with a corporation to help them with their marketing, because that's what her business does, is help you with their marketing. And they're like a regional size company, so they don't have access to a huge marketing team like a Coca-Cola or someone like that would. And another woman, she's working with their leaders on identity and purpose and some of the more soft skills. Her contract is just under $1 million. It's 980 something thousand dollars. Are you using your show to pave the way for a power play? And I'm not saying that everybody's contract is going to be under $1 million. I've yet to have one that's under $1 million, just under $1 million. But you can focus on the positioning piece. Every single person that is listening right now, even if you're like, I'm just tuned out because I know that I'm not interested in some of those bigger power plays. Every single person should go through the test of, how have I positioned myself? Have I positioned myself to solve a problem that my audience recognizes they have? And am I using language that they use? If not, go on AI and do some deep dive research on the problems that your audience has and the language that they are probably using. Do a focus group. Go back and listen and talk to people that you've served before. Everybody should focus on positioning, whether or not
like
you
that.
have an interest.
No, I
for
just
these
wanted
other
to
high value
cover that because it's a really nice, memorable way of doing it with the 3 Ps. Whenever someone's thinking about how they're going to craft an episode, and like you probably already know most of this language that they use. I think, as you say, it's easy to feel like you have to do something really clever, but like, if you've got a AI note taker for your calls, maybe go back and look at those transcripts and see exactly how people are speaking and defining their problems in their words.
Clear is always better. I have a business coach that I've worked with off and on now for about 13 years. And she's made multiple millions of dollars selling courses. And all of her courses are named exactly what they are. Something like the getting started system for speakers. Like, she doesn't call it, amplify to millions, or, just call it what it is. Like, just speak to what the outcome is. Now, if you can be clever and clear, then I'm all for it.
The only challenge with that sometimes is
clear every day of the week.
That there's such a low barrier to entry for starting a podcast. So many podcast names are already taken. You can put your name at the end of it, but ideally you want something unique.
But I think even that is we live in a great time with AI. You can say, like, I want to make sure that my show speaks to the outcome. Here's the outcome. Give me 20 ideas of what I could name the show, that it's clear what the outcome is, and see what is out there, and then search.
And just because we've touched on
search for those,
AI a little bit, and a lot of podcasters are thinking this way at the moment. Is there any other way that you use AI in day to day when you're coming up with or producing your episodes that helps?
I absolutely. Cast Magic changed my life. There was a point 2 years ago that I had decided that if the podcast didn't start to produce more tangible results, that I wasn't going to continue to do it. Because by the time, I produce a show every week, and I do more solo shows now than I used to. I used to do 52, interviews a week or a year. And by the time I did all the things, I was like, man, if this podcast can't get to the point that is producing more tangible results for me, I don't want to do it anymore. And so 2 things changed that. One, you can't see behind me, but I actually earned an award of Female Host of the Year for 2023. So I was like, I guess I kind of have to keep doing it now. And I was introduced to Cast Magic. And so what Cast Magic does, if the listeners aren't familiar, is Cast Magic gives me the ability to upload the audio or the video, and it will give me 10 different ideas of what I can name it. It will write the show notes. It'll give me what I need to say if I want to send out a newsletter about the episode. It gives me what I should put on social media. Like, it really makes all of those things so easy, so that now when it's time to actually produce the episode, I can do that in the span of start to finish, 20 minutes. of getting the episode ready to go because of the mechanisms. And I have not used it to the fullest effect of like there's additional prompts that you can give it to do and things of that nature. But that's the one that I use the most. And then I also sometimes, if I'm stuck on what I want to ask my guests, then I'll use Chat GPT to say, this is the person that I'm interviewing. This is the theme for the month that this episode is going to be part of. This is kind of what I want to talk about. You know, give me 5 questions I could ask them and make sure that you include a mindset question or whatever. Because sometimes I know what I want to ask, and then other times I get stuck or I feel like I need to have some more because you know how it is, Joe. Like sometimes in the answer, someone already starts to answer the next question that you thought you were going to ask. And so you kind of need to have some extra questions to ask in case they do that. So those are the 2 ways.
Yeah, because there's so many tools out there and it's
as
difficult for podcasters to choose which one. And like every kind of tech company is trying to add these AI elements, and some of them they're just sort of tacked on and don't really work properly, and other ones are good. So it's good to get a recommendation. Does it let you do any sort of customization? Like, because I've tried just out of curiosity, I've tried some of the AI tools that give you like show notes, and some of them are pretty good. They let you customize. Some of them seem to just be really rigid in what they think show notes should look like, and I don't necessarily agree with the output.
No, this one does really well on its own. In my opinion, this one,
Okay.
I mean, go back and read some of my show notes. I haven't written not one of those in the last year. I haven't edited them either. I'll say that. But what it'll do is if you don't like, you can give it prompts of like specifically how you want your show notes if you're not pleased with it. But also, if you're not pleased with it, you can tell them to redo it. You can tell them to make it shorter, make it longer, make it more casual, make it more serious. So you really can refine it instead of, to your point, sometimes AI outputs can be so generic that you still have to spend as much time massaging it as you would have if you would have just created it
Nice.
from
Okay,
scratch.
cast
I
magic.
have
Well,
found this
if
one to
anyone
be
is
pretty
looking
good.
for an AI tool to do all these things, then have a look in the show notes because I'll put a link there.
And I will also say just one more thing about Cast Magic. I was on a panel last month. There were about 8 podcast hosts, and when the moderator asked the panel what
Okay,
AI tool that they
cool.
loved the
I'll
most,
be having a look at
8
that.
out of 10 of us said Cast Magic.
And then, oh yeah, I know Opus Clip. Yeah,
I think the second
cool.
one was open
Just going back a little bit,
for
when you
Opus.
first got into podcasting, you said you've been into it for 5 years. Did you have another podcast then, or how did you sort of get into it to begin with?
Yeah, I did. I did. So my podcast, when I first started it, it was called A God Shift. It was actually a faith-based show. And what I noticed, and the reason why I completely went a different direction, not only with my show, but with my business as well, is that I was talking to so many leaders that had all these big goals and all these big dreams and visions, but they were going underfunded because they had the mission. And it's just like many podcasters, they have the mission and the message, but they're missing the method to be able to make it profitable. So then you have all these goals and these dreams and these visions that are going underfunded because they just are missing the message. They're missing the method to be able to be profitable. And what I recognized was, and I said this a little bit earlier, is that I recognized now that I have a show, how much easier it is for me to access profitability. So I just said to myself, well, what if I just went back to what it is that I've always taught? And now I just say, hey, listen, if you know you already have the mission and you already have the message, what you need now is the right vehicle and to pair that vehicle with a monetization strategy. And then I was just thinking about when I started thinking about myself in broader themes, I was like, I don't want this just to be for podcasters, although I do think that we should have a podcast. I was like, what is the problem that I'm really solving? This is really how you take your influence because we all have influence in a different way. If we have a mission and we have a message, then we automatically have some form of influence. And so then when I just started thinking about like, well, what could I name it? I came up with the influence economy. And so I rebranded the show, rebranded my business. I didn't change the RSS feed. I didn't, do anything else. So if you go back, I just released episode 205 or 206 this week. Only the ones from 2025 have been about what it is that we're talking about right now. And so that's something else for people. If you decide to take your show in a different way, I don't recommend that you start over from scratch. I recommend that you change your descriptions, that you just change your cover art, and everything else stays the same. Don't change your RSS feed. Don't change any of that, because what I found was, to my surprise, a lot of people that were listening to me for the other things are still just as, if not more, interested in what I'm
Yeah.
talking about
No,
now.
I'm just
And then I didn't
having a
have to
look,
lose
actually.
my
I can see,
traction.
2024, a God shift. So you found that the guests you had on there were having these challenges around finding the right medium to make it work.
Yeah. I find that whether I'm talking to an entrepreneur, whether I'm talking to a
Mm.
leader, whether I'm talking to a faith-based leader, they all had money problems. And then it's like, well, then that's a shame, because you have this big mission, but you're not really able to do everything that it is that you want to do with your mission, or why you started off, because you don't have the money to do so. And it's the same. It doesn't matter if you're a business owner, if you're a coach, if you are a church leader, if you are a community activist, you fill in the blank. Most of them were having money problems. And I knew that I had a track record of solving people's money problems.
Yeah.
And so I just returned
Yeah, I
to my
love that.
roots and started teaching people how to make more money. Probably
Yeah, I
should
think
have
it'd
never
have to be
gotten
such a
to begin
huge
with, if we're
shift
being
for it to be
honest.
worth leaving your previous podcast behind. Like, one of our clients recently relaunched their podcast, and it is a different niche.
Yeah.
And we did expect some drop in viewership. It's completely different niche, but generally, like, there is still a steady flow of downloads, because she's still the same person. She's still sort of talking to the same people, and they still want to hear. And
Yeah. Yeah. I took a little bit of a dip. So my show was in the top 3%. For the first month and a half, I dropped to the top
mm.
5%, but
and
within a month and a half, I
for
was
anyone
right back up to
thinking,
3, and I'm still at 3.
yeah, no, that's good.
So it didn't even
And
last long.
if
It
anybody's
wasn't a
thinking
huge
like
dip, and it didn't
3%, that
last long.
sounds incredible, which it is. It's a really cool achievement. And with so many podcasts out there, it's very difficult to reach that level. If anyone wants to know where they are you basing that on downloads? How are you? Is there a particular tool you use to figure out where you land?
There are tools out there that's the only thing they do, is determine where your show is ranked. Listen Notes is one of them that you can use. There's a lot of them that are out there, and the only thing they do is scrape the data to see, out of the 3.3 million shows that are out there, where is yours ranked. It'll give you your listen rate, in terms of like how long people are actually listening through to your show. And then it'll also give you your global ranking in percentages out of the however many, and it changes every day. Like your position may not change every day, but if you went back every day and looked at it, it would show you the different number of podcasts that are actually there. And that number changes every day, because you have podcasts that start, you have podcasts that stop. It's kind of like the census.
Yeah, and I
And
think
so
some
that's one of the
podcasters might be
tools that they can use to
surprised to
see actually
realize
where
that
they're
within their
ranked.
particular um, uh, category, that's the word I was looking for, they might be higher than they think. Yeah.
I was And here's the thing, I also don't know how long I had been there, because I didn't think to look. Honestly, I really didn't care. I was doing it for the reasons that I was doing it. I wasn't doing it to rank. Now, that's not true. I'm very strategic about everything that I do to make sure that it does well. I don't spend time doing on things if I'm not going to try to do it with a certain level of excellence. But it never crossed my mind to look and see like where I was ranked. Like, yeah, I would look at downloads, the other metrics that most of us, consider to be important. When I was in this time period of like, I don't even know if I want to do this show again. Right after I won the award, like the next week, somebody started talking about where they were ranked. And I asked the same question you did. Well, what tool do you use to determine that? And then I went and I saw top 3% in the world. I was like, it was a little bit more of a motivation. So I don't want people to see, like, if you log on and you
Yeah.
realize if you're in the top 10%, that's phenomenal. If you're in the top 20%, 25%, that's still phenomenal out of 3.3 million podcasts that are out there. So whatever your number is, don't use it to discourage you. But it was a motivator for me to keep going because I recognized that it was more impactful than what I thought it was. And now to hear people, I was doing a live masterclass for someone else's community a few months ago, and at the end during the Q&A, there was someone that told me, like, I've been listening to your show for a long time. I still listen to it. One of the things that I really love is that it's short, because I know that no matter what I'm doing, I can get through the episode. And so when you start to realize that your show is having impact, that is a motivation
Yeah.
to fight
And
through all of the labor
I'm
of love
sure
and just keep
if
going.
if anyone wants to go and have a look and find out where they land, like you say, don't let that sort of affect you too much, because ultimately it's about, is the podcast getting you where you want it to go? And yeah, as we've talked about, even without any downloads, you can still be benefiting from it.
Yeah. Correct. And there are best practices. I taught a class not that long ago, not that that's my area of expertise, but someone asked me to do it. I taught a class on what some of the best practices are. I can't tell you exactly which one of those best practices got me to where I am, but there are some best practices out there that we can follow. So if you're not pleased with your number, make sure that you're doing the research to find out what are some of the best practices. I can share a couple if you're interested, but it's important that you think about because you can be doing something and not doing it in the most optimal way. So if you do find yourself where you've ranked lower than what you would like to be, then instead of getting discouraged, just ask yourself, well, what are some of the things that I can start to be more intentional about, or I can start to be more strategic about going forward in order to get more ranks so that I can be more impactful? Because obviously the more people that know that the show is there and listen to the show, the more
Yeah.
impact that you're going to have,
Awesome.
which is
Thank
the
you.
reason why most people
And just
start the
as
show to
we
begin with.
come to the end of this interview, can you share anything that you've had a challenge with over the last few years, whether that was with your first podcast or since the rebrand? Anything that you wish you'd have known before you started, or that you'd like to share with any other new podcasters?
I do. I noticed a huge
Yeah.
jump in. So I want to talk about listen through rate for a minute. Most of us understand how credit scores work. Our credit score, at least this is the way it is in the United States. I don't know if it's this way all over the world, but your credit score is comprised of about 4 or 5 different metrics. And I don't remember exactly what the breakdown is, but your credit score, it's like 35% of your credit score is because you pay your bills on time. 30% of your credit score may be how long you've had your credit lines or whatever. Well, there's a very similar thing that happens with podcasts. It's not an exact science like that, but one of the things that really does make a difference in if your show is going to rank is how far in the episode people are actually getting. So the shorter your episode is, basically means the more of your episode that people are going to consume. Because what happens is let's just say you have a show that is an hour long, and the average person only has about 20 or 25 minutes before they have to leave. Even if they have intentions to come back and listen to it later, it still has been recorded that they only listened to your show 25% of the way through. So the podcasting gods, whoever it is that sets these algorithms or that is listening to these things, they automatically by default assume that the reason why people are only listening to 25% of your show is because the content is not good. So if I would have known that sooner, I would have started off with a 20-minute show a long time ago. Once I got to the point that I shortened the length of my episode, because I was like, if it was good, I just kept going and just kept going and kept going. Once I realized that, and when I realized about listen through rate, when I realized that that was part of what was on my ranking thing was my listen score. And so when I realized that, if I would have known that earlier, I probably would have shortened my show way before I did. And my rankings reflected that, because now, just like this young lady said, one of the things I love about your show is that they're always short enough that I can consume the entire thing. If a show is an hour and a half, somebody interviewed me for 2.5 hours one day. I didn't even want to talk that long, let alone listen to it. So that's one of the things that was a challenge for me that I wish I would have done.
People can go on Spotify or iTunes, YouTube. They should show you that information. And then for anyone thinking, go on.
Yep. And that's what I'm glad you said that, Joe, because if your audience is listening to your stuff all the way through, don't shorten it for the sake of shortening it. But what I am saying is go look and see how much of your show that they're consuming. And your goal is you want the bulk of your audience listening to 75% of your show or more. If you notice that your show is not 75% listened through, shorten it. If you notice that it's still not, well, then you have a problem with people just aren't interested in what it is that you're talking about.
And just to note, if anyone's looking at like the average listen through rate and your episodes are already quite short, it could be that some people, your fans that know you, like you and trust you, they're listening to the full thing, but then some are leaving within the first 30 seconds to 3 minutes, and maybe you need to speed up the intro and get into the action more quickly. So if you're looking at an average, then yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of
thank you very much.
Yeah. There's so much to this podcasting world. This is why I said, I don't know why anybody would want to do this, to say, even if just one person listens, there's too much that goes into this world to do that for one person.
But I recommend for anyone listening to go to the Influence Economy. Like Shayna says, there are a lot of quite short episodes on there. So I'd recommend just like picking one up from the recent ones and having listened, because, if you can listen through to it in 15 minutes and probably get even more similar kind of value that you've shared today, which has been really clear and helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of people. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. I'd also like to give them a free gift, if that's okay. So if you've listened to this and you were attracted to being able to get these bigger opportunities, I actually have a free resource. It's called Profit Ready Podcast. And in that download, it's not, just a cheesy PDF. It's a PDF that has a ton of sophisticated strategies, and it also has an audio course that comes with it as well. And they can get that at profitreadypodcast.com. And it's completely complimentary, and it goes into some of what we've discussed today at an even deeper level. So if you're like, yeah, that is really intriguing of how I could use my show as a magnet for these bigger deals, then I would recommend that you get that resource, because it's going to take you even further in how you do this. We talked about some of the steps today, but it's going to take you even further into how you can make that a reality.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome, because that kind of sounds like what a lot of people would charge for. So yeah, profitreadypodcast.com, and I'll put the link in the show notes to that as well. Awesome. Well, thank you, Shayna. And looking forward to seeing where you go with the podcast, and hope we speak again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.